Good morning, John. Thanks very much for that introduction. I'm here today, checking it's up there, to talk to you about how short-termism is threatening marketing effectiveness. We've been asked to speak here following a report we published last year, which looked at the subject, garnered a lot of very positive press attention, as well as positive feedback from the industry. As we all know, the advertising industry is going through a period of profound change. Overall advertising spend continues to increase, with staggering growth in digital advertising. Online now generates more revenue in the UK than traditional television, press, print, radio, out-of-home and cinema combined. This surely is crystal clear evidence of an industry in rude health, with all this huge online marketing growth reflecting advertising effectiveness. To which our answer is, well, sort of. There is evidence, but it is limited in scope and looks internally, not externally. Advertisers and agencies can see click rates and such like, and this evidence is timely and it is persuasive, particularly for non-marketeers, for whom it is presented as it is a comprehensive measure. And many of the UK's media are not so good at being timely and persuasive, even if they are consistently more effective. In other words, the industry is using patchy digital data to underpin a structural bias towards short-term goals. But this marketing short-termism does not exist in isolation. Short-termism as a theme is much bigger than this industry. It is a major structural force, and we can see it right at the top with corporate and investor short-termism. Of course, public companies have long been on the treadmill of quarterly earnings statements, but those pressures have been rising. Classic long-term investment in UK shares, such as pension funds, represented nearly half of investment in UK PLC 20 years ago and has fallen to less than 10% today. While high-growth tech companies enjoy unprecedented investor confidence in their long-term strategies, sectors like retail have been under relentless cost-cutting pressure. As a result, companies obsess over quarterly results to appease investors, the market and the media. A structural response by business has been zero-based budgeting and the rise of procurement, which affect all business functions, including marketing. For example, virtually all media agency deals today are at least in part handled by procurement, and an extraordinary 23% of them are negotiated entirely by procurement. There is nothing intrinsically wrong with procurement as a function, provided it never compares qualitatively complex and differentiated services purely on price. But the evidence would suggest marketing procurement all too often obsesses about cost. It is false to think there are no long-term implications to that approach. Advertisers seeking to drive down costs put pressure on agency fees. Meanwhile, agency client tenures have fallen from about 7 years to 2.5 years. This means 12 months into agreement, both companies are already starting to consider the next negotiation. Hardly the optimal way to build long-term productive relationships, or for agencies to consider investing in creative quality when it might be at the expense of price competitiveness in a future negotiation. Additionally, chief marketing officers have the shortest tenure in the senior team, about half the time of CEOs. Other data suggests even shorter tenures, with the duration in the UK possibly being about half in each of these director positions. A figure in Campaign a couple of weeks ago put the average length for a marketing director being just 18 months. And again, there are inevitable consequences on how marketeers think about their goals, about the timetable they work to, and how their bosses and peers think about their performance in the short and longer term. One of the factors that might reasonably be expected to counter this structural bias would be a commitment to long-term brand building by a board-level chief marketing officer. But anyway, marketeers are not often even on company boards. In one study of 65,000 US directors, fewer than 3% of them had any marketing experience. Thus, if marketing directors don't sit around the board table and they are there half as long as their bosses, then the brand performance overall may be less of a concern, particularly if costs can be cut. So arguably, marketing is being driven by the agendas of procurement and other non-marketing specialists. And in the meantime, company boards can see how quickly consumers and consumption are changing. Endless new ways to engage with consumers at different points in the value chain. And mobile is at the heart of it. And penetration into the last generation is growing rapidly. Over 3/4 of 55-64s now have smartphones, and soon over half of the over 65s. The shopping funnel is changing with multiple touch points, and e-commerce and mobile is growing with implications for marketing. The rise in the use of online product research, price comparison sites and purchase channels is challenging the brand advertising model. But purchasing online is not the same thing as shopping in the broadest sense, and neither of these are the same thing as discovery or value perception or consumer confidence. We believe industry and the marketeers that support industry are often making much more brave decisions than they realise, without necessarily understanding any possible long-term consequences. One manifestation of that bravery is that direct response marketing is growing substantially, as you can see on the chart on the left. Not only has online grown from 3% of UK direct response to over 80%, but the total pot has more than doubled since 2000. By contrast, brand and display marketing in the right-hand chart has barely grown in 2 decades, and so far, relatively little of that spend has transitioned to online. This is an underrated manifestation of this short-term bias, with huge consequences for how marketing works. Back in 2000, 60% of ad spend was brand and display, but now we estimate it to be about 46%. Here you can see brand advertising in blue and direct response in pink, and then there's splits between online and offline in the inner circles. But all activation advertising needs brand marketing to sustain efficiencies, and complex and emotional market messaging cannot be delivered and measured as direct response. For example, search marketing, perhaps the purest direct response tool, becomes less effective over time if not supported by brand communications. But direct response advertising alone won't enable brands to maintain their premium price position and market share over time. With digital platforms able to demonstrate click-through rates so quickly, several things happen. It feeds the desire to provide evidence to non-marketeers who need short-term data. It generates an ROI measure, often attributing marketing effectiveness to digital campaigns without taking into account the extensive, say, television or magazine advertising that has also been running, where returns are modelled in various ways over various timeframes. And the focus on short-term online successes risks reducing management focus on long-term planning and long-term effectiveness. In other words, there is a vicious circle because we're not measuring the long-term consequences for brands, but we are overstating the value of short-term targeting and engagement. And we are underrating the importance of long-term awareness and consideration through quality associations and context. Not all the value of marketing relates to the search and social click-through, or if it does, we're collectively saying goodbye to quality media, and advertising effectiveness will diminish over time. And it's complicated. We're not arguing everyone is doing the wrong thing, we're arguing the industry is changing more radically than the evidence can keep up with, and that for all the changes to the shopping funnel, we have no evidence, none at all, that the marketing fundamentals have changed. Of course, different categories have different kinds of challenges. Breakfast cereals, for example, have not been disrupted to anything like the same degree as, say, the travel sector or personal finance, in which the arrival of the internet has transformed the consumer journey. Here, we're broadly segmenting the advertiser categories by degree of industry disruption. What is interesting is some of the most severely disrupted categories are using high-quality brand advertising in TV and magazines as well as online to differentiate their products and services. John Lewis Home Insurance is a great example of this, where the focus is on the company's brand values to differentiate the product from the direct response effort of other personal finance services in the marketplace. Meanwhile, some less disrupted categories have perhaps paradoxically shifted their marketing spend more radically. It's interesting to note that while many consumer packaged goods companies have shifted budgets to direct response, online businesses have become the biggest television advertiser category in the UK. What is undoubtedly true is that greater variance in industry disruption and a more complex shopping funnel means marketing methodology needs to be differentiated. When the attribution tools for performance marketing are clearer than those for brand advertising, then the role of the brand in all sales will inevitably be undercounted. In plain English, planning and creative matter more now than ever before, and yet investment in them seems to be falling. As an industry, we are pouring more and more revenues into two platforms. Recent US data suggests 100% of online advertising growth is generated by Google and Facebook. We've estimated the run rate here in the UK was about 90% in 2017. Such radical spending patterns and extraordinary concentration intuitively feel extreme to us. What surprised us more was that when we discussed this with a wide range of advertisers, not one of them was not at some point concerned about it too, yet they seemed unable to stop the vicious circle. It's like a collective shrugging of the shoulders, as if marketing has become part of a larger corporate attitude it can do nothing to influence. Yet, to repeat, the fundamental truths of marketing remain robust. Context and association remain critical. For one thing, brand safety costs money. And of course, media context offers huge additional value to brands through their quality environment and perfectly primed audience immersion. Building brands takes investment, and building brands takes time, measured not in minutes and hours and days and weeks, but over months and years. Concern for demonstrated return on investment in tough budgeting procedures favours digital direct responses and glosses over marketing's ignorance of the effects and interactions of other media. Here you can see that the return on investment impact for a week spent on performance media was pretty much fully registered within 1 week, whereas it took 1 year before a similar level of sales attribution was recognised for a comparable brand investment. When we spoke to the market, we found two things. No one, not a single person anywhere, disagreed with the thrust of our argument, and yet no one fitted into the stereotype that is frequently attributed to different roles. Young traders are not fools who don't understand brand marketing. Planners are highly astute about the risks of excessive short-termism. Finance directors are eloquent and knowledgeable about challenges in marketing and sales. Senior executives openly refer to return on investment as an abused term and metric. Google and Facebook acknowledge tough measurement challenges and complex trade-offs are ahead. No one thinks that digital marketing is not hugely valuable for certain kinds of objective, even those that worry most about attribution bias. In all, what we became increasingly aware of is a collective action problem. Every part of the ecosystem, from advertisers to media agencies and creative agencies to technology platforms to traditional media, is responsible for how things work today. Everyone is complicit, and so everyone is to blame. The problem is, every player has a vested interest in how issues are addressed. Everyone has a lot to lose, and no one is thinking about how the whole industry might go down more quickly or otherwise. Everyone's fear of losing out overwhelms any hunger they have to improve the system. Some said to us, we're at the foothills of an immature digital industry, so what did we expect? But that's just a contradiction. Digital advertising is more than 50% of all advertising, so this is not an industry that can afford to be in its troubled teenage phase. It's in everyone's interest to address the key issues. Let me finish with a few observations and remind us of one simple thing. Only one person puts money into the marketing value chain, consumers. The rest of us just shuffle money around the system. In the end, we believe advertisers have the responsibility and are best placed to trigger change in the industry. Embracing new direct response channels and moving brand display spend online is necessary for a growing number of advertisers, but it should be recognised that perfect attribution is a false goal, and structurally biased attribution is commonplace. We would love to see advertisers value long-term planning and creative more, and be transparent about that value. Marketing has to be about experienced judgment based on evidence and informed by financial analytics and performance. Data and judgment are both required to optimise marketing effectiveness, and we would love to see advertisers valuing judgment more. We would love to see advertisers remind themselves that scarcity is an industry currency, and so there is such a thing as too much advertising. Unregulated media should regulate itself, not wait for regulation to be imposed upon it. We would love to see advertisers set out their collective needs and expectations more clearly. What are their business objectives, and which marketing objectives will they set to deliver them, rather than how much money they expect to spend this quarter on social media. And right at the heart of the solution, there needs to be clear evidence of the value and benefits of premium context, and so show the effects of long-term media planning and marketing creative, even on short-term activation and sales. Thank you.